What do youth programs, end of life care, and private equity have in common? They're all part of the playbook for Neel Bhargava, founding partner of NB Group Investors, an entrepreneur reshaping how investment works and why it matters. In this episode, Neel unpacks the real differences between private equity and venture capital, how he raises capital deal by deal, and why AI is becoming essential to business strategy. He shares lessons on building relationships, spotting great deals, and staying persistent, even when the market says no. It's sharp, it's thoughtful, and it might just change how you think about business.
Of all the things you could do with your life, why did you choose to do this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, there's probably other things I wanted to do, but I realized I couldn't do, like be a professional basketball player or be a manager of musical artists. Those are some passions I had at some point. But I think where I landed, being an entrepreneurial private equity investor, has been a really good spot. I was trained in business and consulting and private equity, but realized somewhere along that path that I wanted to be more entrepreneurial, explore doing a few other things, and ultimately landed back to start my own private equity firm where we have a much more entrepreneurial culture. I get to focus on things I like doing, industries I enjoy, and oftentimes am personally passionate about. I think mix of entrepreneurial desire, but doing something I really was trained and knew how to do in private equity investing. So I think it's been a good landing spot.
Some people might consider that running a private equity firm isn't entrepreneurship. What would you say to that?
Starting and running any business is entrepreneurship. It's a different kind, right? You're not running an operating business, but you are running a business. We make investments that generate revenue for us. We have expenses with, a team. We have an infrastructure that we need to build to support all that. We have processes that we go through. So it's a different type of business than probably many people are accustomed to when they think about, a company, but we're a business, and starting it is entrepreneurial in my mind.
How did you get started with raising funds for this?
So our model is that we raise capital specific to each deal. So when we make an investment, we have institutions that we will work with who will back that specific deal. We don't have a fund that we draw on for every investment. So that's how we capitalize each deal. In terms of our operating business, how we fund that, I mean, it's bootstrapped. When I first started, I was doing other work on the side, to kind of get the bills paid. And then as we got up and running, that's gone away, and we generate working capital to run our business from the investments we make. But to start, it was bootstrapped.
What's the difference between private equity and venture capital in terms of your timeline to ROI?
There's a number of key differences between venture capital and private equity. One is the stage of the company that you invest in. Venture capital's early stage. Oftentimes it could just be at the earliest stage. It's a design on a napkin. The sort of fairy tale around that. Private equity, we invest in established operating businesses, generating cash flow, have a product or service that they're selling, and we're looking to come in, partner with the owner, or founder owner of the business to accelerate that growth, really take it to the next level. In terms of the timeline, I think venture capital often has a longer time horizon. You can invest in a company at the seed stage and take it through Series C, E, or to IPO. That can take, and it's increasingly taking longer because companies don't want to go public, but you could be in a business for 10 plus years. Private equity typically has a 5-year time frame. We have a flexible mandate where we can hold businesses for longer than that, but generally you're targeting 5 years, and in venture capital, it could be much longer.
Do you ever do deals where the goal is to be able to have like a dividends or some percentage of profit share on a monthly basis or quarterly basis in order to help you with the capitalization of the actual operating business?
We do consider situations where we go into a deal and we say there are going to be distributions on an ongoing basis because we don't have other uses for that cash flow. Particularly if it's a longer term hold, that could make sense because most people don't want to wait 10 years or more for any sort of liquidity. More often, we find that there are other uses for the cash than to make distributions or dividends on an annual basis. That could be growth initiatives, it could be acquisitions, it could be paying down debt. We use debt in most of our transactions, though not all. So there's usually other uses for the cash that will help the balance sheet of the business or the growth of the business going forward.
So when I say that, I'm referring to you were saying in the very beginning you were doing consulting and stuff to generate money for you to be able to operate this. So that's what I'm referring to, is taking distributions on a quarterly basis from the companies you're investing in order to keep your team fed.
So we do, in most cases, take a advisory fee from the companies, which is, in exchange for the support we give our businesses, and we are active hands-on investors. I've gone down into the weeds, taking on interim CFO roles for our companies, or taking on running M&A for a company for 2 years. So we're quite involved, and in exchange for that, we do take management or advisory fees that are paid often monthly or quarterly, if the business has the means to support it. There could be situations where the cash flow is better used for other purposes, and we'll defer our fee for a point of time. But that does help, keep the lights on.
I've spoken to hundreds of founders, and what I've found is the ones that are the most successful are able to separate themselves from the need to do things inside of the business on a daily basis. You just said that sometimes you'll go into one of the businesses you've invested in and take on an interim role. Do you feel like doing that prohibits you from being able to grow the firm as a whole? And wouldn't it be better for you to find someone who could do that for you?
It does, all the time you spend, especially with a small team. We're two partners. There's only so many hours in the day. So the more time you spend on the portfolio companies, the less time you have to make new investments and grow the firm overall. But sometimes it's necessary. You have to do what you have to do. If your CFO or another executive were to depart a company, it would take time to find someone else. You might just need to step into that role out of necessity and grow that business, right? It's also important to grow your portfolio companies and make sure that you're on track to generate the returns that you want. So we always weigh, where we're spending our time and what's the best use of time. But sometimes that is the best use of time. There's also a cost component. Getting a consultant CFO, an interim executive, is usually quite expensive, and that can burden a company. So if we have the time and we feel like we're the best, we'll take the role. In other situations, we'll slot someone in.
So say that there's two partners. What's the size of your actual team, though?
4 people. So we've got 2 partners and 2 analysts. Small team.
So if both of you were involved inside of the business, then the analysts are kind of running things on their own at the moment.
Well, we just wouldn't be really pursuing new investments, so we would be on hold for that time. But that hasn't happened, and I don't think we would really try to avoid that situation, because we do want at least one of us to be actively hunting for new investments or pursuing new themes. That's part of our approach, is to be thematic and research new areas we want to invest in, network, build up our relationships. So I think we would really try to avoid the situation where both of us were knee deep in operating companies.
So what is your current theme, and how often do you reassess that theme?
We will usually generate and pursue 2 to 3 new themes per year. Currently, we just launched a theme around youth enrichment and early childhood education, which are two separate but adjacent markets. So youth enrichment is, after school activities, sports leagues, summer camps. It's a really fragmented market with tons of demand, not enough supply, and a lot of positive market forces behind it. Education, similar drivers, and both have, can have pretty attractive business models that fit within our multi-location theme. So that's one area we're pursuing. On this sort of very different side of things, we are looking at a couple things related to end of life. So the quote death care industry, funeral homes, crematoriums. This is, the far end of the spectrum from early childhood education. But what we look for are industries that we believe there's an opportunity to build market leaders, where there's not so many to date, where there are, it's a fragmented market where there's a lot of willing owners to sell, where we don't have to pay too much for businesses, and we can generate, strong returns. So those are a couple we're pursuing right now. Over the years, there's been dozens that we've pursued.
Do you have any emphasis on the use of artificial intelligence in these themes, or do you avoid them because you want to avoid hype and overpaying?
I think anyone in any industry has to be thinking about AI right now. We have increasingly been using it in our own firm operations and our workflows. And when we look at a business right now, I think you have to think about, how will AI shape this business over time? There are certainly private equity investors who are pursuing strategies that incorporate AI as a cost-cutting tool to, improve profitability of in businesses that they invest in. That's not something we've really pursued, but we do think about how will AI impact this? Like if it's a service business, can AI replace that service over time? Or how can AI enhance this business over time? How can it let the company generate more revenue or be more efficient? So we are thinking about it in our own firm situations and in investments we pursue.
When talking about end of life, are you thinking about euthanasia? I know it's illegal in the US, but maybe you're looking at opportunities outside the US as well, where maybe euthanasia is not.
No, that's not. No, we're not talking about that. We're just talking about. I mentioned funeral homes. That's just a business that uh, has a morbid connotation, but it's a business like any other. Hospice care, which is a really, I think, compelling uh, proposition for patients. It's a better way to end your life, or to experience the final months of your life, and it's also a positive for the healthcare system. It's lower cost. So I don't love talking about these areas all the time, but they're pretty interesting themes to invest behind.
Something I've heard about recently is the use of psilocybin mushrooms to give people in hospice opportunity to experience something outside of themselves that makes them that the result is it makes them not afraid of death anymore.
Yeah, I just read a couple months ago How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. The book talks quite a bit about different, I mean, the whole book is about the effects of psychedelic substances on the mind and, different use cases and benefits. And one of them is about the use for patients who are, facing terminal illness. And it tends to open their minds to not being afraid of that and having a relieved from that so that they can really enjoy the last chapters of their life. So yeah, it was a fascinating book. Definitely recommend the read, and he discusses that.
So is anyone you're looking at have that kind of concept, or are you just ignoring that right now?
No, it's not. I mean, they might. We haven't really probed on that. I'm not sure. We have. There are other related opportunities. There's some here. I'm in Brooklyn. There's a couple concepts that have popped out that are focused on ketamine therapy or other alternative therapies for mental health issues, and which there's a lot of science behind that they can be pretty effective. So we have at the surface level looked at some things like that, but it's not an area we've gone deep from an investment perspective.
Okay. Now, how have you had to change yourself as a result of running this kind of a company?
Well, I think building relationships is a key part of what you need to do to be successful in establishing and running an investment firm. You need to have relationships, particularly in private equity. You need to build strong relationships with the sellers of businesses. You need to have strong relationships with capital sources. And, a lot of I spent a good amount of time on those two things, right? Maintaining and building relationships with capital sources. And when we really are pursuing investment, we spend a lot of time, really demonstrating our ability to be value added to the company, and also but just building that relationship one on one at a personal level with business owners. So that's not something that I think you need to do as much if you are at a large established for 30 years private equity firm and you're one of you know 15 partners. It's much more important for us, because we're kind of doing everything and we're on the front lines, both on the capital and the selling side. So that's an area that I think I've needed to really spend more time on and efforts.
What are some things you're thinking about for your firm now that you're working on changing for the next quarter or two?
So I think you mentioned AI. We're definitely trying to find ways to use it more effectively. I think we're just scratching the surface of what we could be doing. I can think of several different ways that if we had someone internally or we knew how to be more effective at using or potentially building tools using machine learning and AI, we could differentiate, could be on the sourcing of new investment sides, just being able to very efficiently generate lists of target companies and have a more systematized and automatic flow for reaching out to them. It could be generating content that we can use to market ourselves. It could be just in our own diligence process, which we have definitely started to embrace a lot more, using AI to research industries or run specific analyses for us. But there's a lot more I think we could be doing. So that's something that I'm spending more time on exploring and really trying to learn how to reorient our firm to take advantage of all that. So that's something that's top of mind.
Do you think New York is the right place to run this kind of a firm? Do you think you have access to a lot of great businesses, or are they other places and you have to just work with them from where you are?
Well, yeah, I mean, we invest across the country. We've got a business in Oregon, one in the Northeast, one in the Southeast. So geography doesn't really limit where we can invest. And I'm in New York. My partner is actually based in Miami, so we are in a couple different places, but across the East Coast. Um, I think you can run this type of business from any decent sized city. It doesn't have to be New York, but there is an ecosystem here that is beneficial, but it exists in other cities as well. Being close to the companies you invest in has advantages for sure. Getting on a flight to Oregon, where one of our companies is based, it's more of a commitment than if the company was, I could drive 2 hours to New Jersey. So there are advantages, and there are firms that have strategies around investing, but I also think you limit your opportunity set with that. So I think it's a good place to be, but it could be somewhere else.
Have you ever looked outside the country, or you're not considering that right now?
We've pursued investments in Canada and the UK. We haven't, those are probably the closest market structurally to the US. So it's not, I don't think we would go beyond that unless we had a really strong angle, like potentially someone we were partnering with, like an investor we were partnering with who had a presence in that state. I think it becomes challenging for multiple reasons, but we have looked in Canada and the UK.
What is the hardest thing for you about running this business?
Finding good investment opportunities at prices we feel comfortable with. The market is very efficient. The U.S. private equity market is, very and increasingly efficient, even at the lower middle market, as we call it, the sort of small, medium-sized businesses that we invest in. Increasing number of investors, sellers are increasingly sophisticated. There's tons of intermediaries who will tell sellers that their business is worth, you know, 10 times EBITDA when we think it's worth 6 times EBITDA. So it's hard to find good deals at good prices. We're not looking to buy something cheaply. I mean, we're growth-oriented investors. We're comfortable paying appropriate prices for businesses, but we don't want to stretch so far that our ability to hit our returns targets is imperiled. So I think that's the hardest part about this job, I would say. And how do you get around that? I mean, being thematic is one approach that's been effective for us. We really generate a knowledge base in an industry that helps us differentiate among other prospective buyers. We get to know a lot of people in the industry that leads to referrals. We've done 2 of our deals have come as a result of that process. So that's one area, but I think there could be, other ways, like really having a more automated approach to outreach that lets you have more leads at the top of the funnel. But that's the most challenging part at the moment.
What's the most important thing you've learned in your life so far?
In my life so far, I mean, I'm 40 years old, so there's been a lot of lessons. I think that you have to learn to deal with setbacks and failures. There are things that you really can work hard on that are not going to go your way, or you can have failures, and you just have to be able to absorb those and learn from those, but also just be persistent. I think you have to be persistent in anything if you want to be successful. So that's an important lesson.